Climbing is about so much more than a summit. It's about confronting fear, dealing with adversity instead of ducking it. On a really desperate climb, there's no hiding from your true self. And that's the greatest challenge.
Years of ice surrounding it. Looks like it's into Jeff's old rope. Maybe it's just tied into the end of the rope and he saw it off.
When the sport was invented, it was to get to the highest summits. Once all the highest summits had been climbed, then it was, well, let's pick the loveliest and more challenging routes to the summit. It becomes a matter of aesthetics.
For some people, that's symmetry. For some people, difficulty plays a big role. For some people, it's the purity of the line and so on.
The coolest peaks by the most dramatic, most difficult routes.
Somewhere along the way, it wasn't even about the difficulty of the route, it was about the style.
Searching for sort of a transcendental experience. An experience would take you out of your normal world and teach you something new about yourself and about the world that you're in.
You've got to go out there and put yourself at risk and get beat up and suffer. Some people might think climbers are all masochists.
And every story that involves people getting in trouble and getting out of it raises that very question, you know, why the hell do we do this?
Whatever the reasons, climbing standards have been pushed forward by those able to imagine things that others could not. You hear names like Wiesner, Harlan, Robbins, Chenard, Bonatti, Hornbein, and Jeff Lowe.
Jeff Lowe's one of those seminal climbers who's a rarity in the history of any sport. He's the greatest alpinist to come out of North America.
The guy lived climbing.
Right there on the cutting edge.
There was just one name, you know, back in the days. That's Jeff Lowe.
A legendary figure.
One of my heroes.
I thought he was crazy half the time, but it was also inspiring.
It was always a privilege to climb with Jeff.
To do a first ascent with Jeff Lowe, yeah, that's living.
What Jeff went on to do individually is really a story unlike any other. It's a story that needs to be told.
In recent years, Jeff has lost his ability to speak clearly. But he still has a lot to say.
How is your life?
I'm happy and at peace with myself, taking each moment for what it is. The whole
Purpose is to know ourselves. And my climbing has always been a search for myself and what my true capacities are.
In the 1950s, climbing was evolving into the modern era. And in Ogden, Utah, in the mountains of the American West, the low brood was being raised with a spirit of adventure that would set the course for their exceptional lives.
I'm Jeff's older brother by about 18 months. And of course, I've shared a life with him.
I don't even know how to describe our family.
I would say we were really close, if not always mentally, physically, you know, because we had a lot of kids in small houses.
Amazing, all of them, the Lows. Elgene Lowe, the most amazing woman I ever met. All of her children felt completely supported for who they were.
Childhood was about, I think, as good as it could get.
Fun and adventure, and it was a great way to grow up.
Growing up in my family, I thought anything was possible. My mom's stamp of approval set every adventure off on solid footing.
Our dad was rather eccentric, and he liked to do things that most people don't do.
He just liked to participate in almost every sport.
He liked to turn anything into an adventure.
So it was that kind of a childhood, always something to do.
My dad wasn't a big worrier. No matter how cold it was, he'd say, it's just right. When we'd go skiing, we didn't know that you could actually go in the lodge.
He didn't tell you how to do things. He let you learn how to do them. Jeff was a really good student of that kind of philosophy, that experiential learning process.
The Lows were a climbing family, inspired by their dad. Ralph Lowe was constantly on the go, with his 8 kids following behind like baby ducks. But by their teens, those same kids were leading Dad up the mountain.
I was climbing in some of the cliffs above Ogden using an old clothesline at one point. And we all liked being in the mountains.
Jeff was really interested in climbing, you could tell from an early age.
From the age of 14, I thought of first ascents as works of art, not competitive triumphs.
At about the same age, we began skiing.
Jeff was really a good skier.
When he shifted to climbing, just like his ski racing, he jumped right in.
Skiing happens more quickly, you know, downhill skiing. It's more thrilling, but the precision of focus and concentration that goes along with climbing is just unbeatable.
He developed rapidly in climbing.
He could move well, very well.
When we went on trips together, there was no way I could keep up with him.
If there were a hard pitch to climb, it was usually Jeff climbing it, not me.
When everything's right, you're feeling strong and light, but also very aware and alert and focused on the problem at hand, everything directed in one aligned upward movement.
When I was young, I didn't understand that he was doing things that were special that other people weren't doing.
It was an incredibly kind of free and open period of our lives.
Jeff was happy when he was climbing.
One of the places that I think was the most magical was Zion.
It was just pure climbing, as good as climbing gets.
His ability to envision routes in his mind created all kinds of opportunities for him. A lot of people wanted to repeat someone else's routes. Jeff generally wanted to create routes. Climb after climb, each one harder and harder and harder.
It was always amazing to see how persistent he was. He may not have been the best climber in the world, but boy, I'll tell you, he would figure out a way to get through an obstacle.
Jeff and Greg formed the strongest nucleus of American climbing.
The low name is synonymous with hard climbing.
The equipment of that time was not designed for the kinds of things we wanted to do. So I started designing products to fill that need. I decided to party up with my brother Mike, and we set up in Colorado in '73.
I got a $3,000 loan, and that's how it all started.
Inventing things which revolutionized climbing for the planet.
Clothing and cutting-edge gear.
Jeff was sort of a technical advisor on the use of these products at that time because he was so actively involved in climbing.
And he had his own designs later on, and he did some good work there.
But Jeff was kind of the one in the family that really stuck to climbing.
He could see the great lines, he had the ability to climb them, and he could make the tools that would make it happen.
New gear, new techniques, and new ideas.
Clearly, he had ideas about where climbing should go.
Expert at thinking outside of the box.
He's a very creative guy, had a great sense of humor, and was really fun to be with.
Wants to know you, wants to be your friend, wants to talk about what life is really about here, not just climbing.
Oh, we had a shit ton of good times.
Climbing was a much smaller sport in those days, pretty out of the mainstream. Climbers were sort of weird. It was a total subculture. Jeff looked like a hippie. Blonde-haired, sort of wild-eyed hippie.
Seeing his hair in the sunshine, there's nothing like that.
Jeff's always had a certain sort of charisma.
You know, if Jeff was along, we're probably likely to have some good feminine companionship as well.
Ladies sort of migrate in his direction, and he didn't discourage it.
The climbing world at that time, he was quite a celebrity.
Probably the most challenging sport to confront any daring adventurer is mountain climbing. Well, our man in the field, Bill Rafferty, found Jeff Lowe, who has to be the most daring of them all.
Lowe, right, Jeff?
If I tried to give you a laundry list and go down everything that he's done, it'd almost I think you'd glaze over and kind of get bored. But if you look at the great routes that he did in a place like, say, Zion, the great routes he did in places like the Canadian Rockies, truly visionary lines, truly at the cutting edge.
Jeff is what I call an all-rounder. On rock, ice, mixed climbing, alpine climbing.
Free climbing, aid climbing, big walls, frozen waterfalls, high alpine ice routes. I like the entire spectrum of climbing.
But he was, first and foremost then, an alpine climber.
Alpinism is the crystallization of all those techniques in the harshest high-altitude environment you can find. It demands mastery of all those different skill sets one would acquire on the rock and ice.
You train on the crags, and then eventually those skills end up in the mountains.
The Himalayas, Peru, the Canadian Rockies, Alaska, the Pakistan Karakoram, and the Eiger.
Jeff had sort of a transcending thought process that improved at levels where stress would overtake other people. Jeff shifted into sort of a hyper-gear, creative mindset and not get rattled by rotten rock and ice falling off and all this. It just didn't let it affect his thought process.
He just gives this confidence level out. If all his partners got together in one room, that's what they'd say. He just sets his mind on something and away he goes.
He liked the big roots, the really hard things, ones that were not commonplace, repetitive roots.
He became the leading alpine climber of his generation.
Jeff had gained the attention of climbers worldwide. His growing reputation earned him an offer from a major television network to join an expedition to Nepal's Ama Dablam. The scale and publicity of the expedition, however, required Jeff to deviate from his minimalist alpine ethics. But despite the hoopla, he found the sort of challenge he was looking for.
It's been called the most beautiful mountain in the world, and it is. Jeff practically fell off the trail looking at it.
Oh, I'm in a bomb.
Jeff, who in later years would do so much to pioneer light, fast alpine ascents, he wasn't the kind of person who wanted to be at the front leading a big group. He wanted to be off doing his own thing and setting standards.
We came to the village of Tengboche, and we were invited into the monastery for a puja ceremony to bless our expedition. A Tibetan singing bowl has frequencies tuned into it. It resonates so much with the harmonies that are built into our bodies and our brains, our way of consciousness. Jeff was really taken by this blessing that these Buddhists had given us and talked about it later and up on the mountain.
Oh, yeah. This is going to be a cruise.
Jeff goes at his task as if he might be taking a casual stroll, as if there's hardly any effort required and no danger to fear.
Woo! Oh, man, look at the Dablam.
But then it suddenly gets really serious. Climbing over spires and around towers.
So on the summit day, Jeff led a very large contingent to the summit. Maybe 8 or 9 people summited together. And Jeff was the only person who had a headlamp for the descent.
Boy, I was wiped out from going to the summit, and all I could think about was crawling back down to the airport and going home.
By any stretch of the imagination, our expedition was a huge success. And we could go home happy. We were only the second team to ever climb Ama Dablam.
And Jeff was pacing.
Jeff had done his job, but he wasn't personally satisfied. So he went out the next day and did this 4,000-foot vertical ascent on the south face of Ama Dablam, which had never been climbed before.
Climbing that hard at those altitudes alone just wasn't being done.
Total alpine style, totally by himself, no ropes, no climbing partner, never been repeated, and it's a phenomenal achievement. Soloing that mountain felt so pure. I didn't have to deal with the expedition. I just climbed.
Jeff left his mark in ranges all over the world, but one climb in particular stands above the rest. Laytok 1.
It's Pakistan, in the Karakoram Himalaya, pretty close to the Chinese border. And this cirque is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my life. And we looked at the route for a few days. 8,500 vertical feet of relief.
And then we started up the route.
All of us sort of shared that sense of vision of what could possibly be done with a small group of climbers, as light as we could and as fast as we could.
Alpine climbing is all about style. You leave the ground and you're on your own. You have no umbilical cord between you and base camp.
The lower part was mostly really good rock climbing. The middle third was more mixed, sort of like the complete climb in terms of presenting all kinds of different technical challenges.
And we just kept climbing.
And Jeff looked down and he said, God, this is so much fun.
We had these little tents that were developed by low alpine systems, very narrow, so they could fit on small ledges. And we woke up in the morning, it was storming. So we sat there for, I think, 6 days on half rations. And then the weather improved and we just started climbing again. We're only a few hundred feet below Summit Ridge. We're feeling pretty worked. Jeff and I start digging the snow cave, and halfway through digging the snow cave, he starts feeling really ill. It came on very quickly.
That evening it started snowing. Jeff started feeling worse.
And we go, okay, we gotta go for it.
And Jeff was moving very, very slowly and painfully.
I couldn't really see him too well because he was kind of slumped over and covered in snow. And I thought, oh no, he's dead. Not a word was said. Just started going down, getting Jeff back down to the snow cave.
We had to stick together. We didn't know if he was gonna make it.
I was really afraid he'd be dead in the morning.
Now it's a question of getting down alive. As sick as he was, he did it. We did 85 rappels. It took us 4 days. We told him we'd be gone for 2 weeks. And we'd been gone for 26 days. For all of us, it was a life-defining experience.
I still think of it as the best climb I've ever been on.
We'd had an incredible experience sharing it together.
Latok showed me how far out I could go within a team of true friends.
And now it's become the holy grail of mountaineering.
There's been close to 40 expeditions to that route, and I've actually been to try that route 4 times and haven't gotten anywhere close.
No one's completed the route.
No one's reached our high point.
For me, the most amazing ascents that Jeff did were the ones he actually didn't complete, the ones that were so visionary, that were so far ahead of their time that not even he could do them.
Jeff was successful in the mountains because he wasn't seeking success. The means were the end. But would the same approach work on an even greater challenge of a completely different nature?
Yeah. Oops. Falling.
Good you're doing this interview before I die.
Which isn't long, apparently. When Jeff's malady began to manifest itself, there were just little problems that popped up.
So Jeff, what brings you to the Adirondacks?
Climbing. Excuse me.
But we didn't put it together to be anything.
This hit him at a time where he was still climbing well.
And he continued to climb even when the symptoms were pretty bad.
Walking in, walking out, things like that started to become a bit of a stumbling affair at times.
He started to talk to me about, just having trouble doing normal things.
He said, you know, I'm getting these weird feelings. I really have bad balance now. I don't know what's wrong with me.
Okay, oops, falling. Okay.
We thought it was MS.
And that's what they thought it was for a long time, but sometimes diseases are hard to diagnose exactly. First, not be able to climb, then not really even be able to walk.
Here's Jeff Lowe, demigod to climbing, and he's on a pair of crutches.
He's a really gifted athlete. He's a very, very good communicator and writer. So you see all of that dropping away from him.
I think eating.
And then a year after that, he's in a wheelchair. So it was just sort of gradually losing control of his body.
This last part of his life is harder than anybody really understands.
Well, I need to move my own balance point. I'm good. Yeah, fine.
It's tough to see your friends go away.
But it's also allowed me to ask the same questions of myself.
How would I handle this?
Would I have been able to handle that?
I don't know how I would handle it.
I would have packed it in a long time ago, probably, if I was the that I cared most about. The one thing that gave me pleasure was taken from me.
It's profoundly ironic. Someone who could handle mountain terrain anywhere is now in a wheelchair.
Slowly, he had to let go of his attachment to his identity and figure out how to gracefully live his life.
A life in the vertical realm brought Jeff closer than most to an understanding of mortality. But tracing exactly what prepared him for this final push is an exploration of the very evolution of his sport.
In Telluride, Colorado, 9,000 feet high in the San Juan Mountains, one of the toughest ice climbs anywhere is the sheer frozen drop of water known as Bridal Veil Falls. It was first mastered by Jeff Lowe and his partner, Mike Weiss.
In the history of any sport, it's really rare to be able to reinvent the activity one time. And if you look at Lowe's track record, he's actually reinvented the sport 3 times in his life. The first one was when he climbed the first descent of Bridal Veil Falls. That was an eye-opener.
We were sort of blissfully naive in a way. We didn't really know that it was kind of a completely unknown medium at the time. Gear designs that were completely new and untested.
He took those tools and made him do things that no one had imagined. There weren't other routes like that for years afterward.
The second time that Jeff Lowe reinvented the sport of winter climbing would have been when he soloed that same route, Bridal Veil Falls. At the time, it was unthinkable.
The kinds of climbs that Jeff was doing revolutionized what was possible in that medium, revolutionized how you thought about that medium. It's not a natural human instinct to go climbing vertical frozen waterfalls, and he made it his home. these incredibly beautiful worlds. And in a place like that, maybe anything is possible.
Waterfall ice climbing is really unique in that the medium itself is so ethereal. To be climbing this glass-like substance is really kind of unique.
The third time Jeff reinvented the sport of winter climbing was when he did the first ascent of Octopussy. It was the images of that route and the terrain that he just boldly tackled that reinvigorated the sport. And I think it changed everyone's concept of what was possible.
And just seeing that was sort of eye-opening and wild.
An indelible image to every ice and mixed climber in the world.
That made people say, wow, let's go have fun.
The sub-sport of mixed climbing has developed from Jeff Lowe's ascent of Octopussy into an entirely new type of climbing.
This is the kind of climbing that I enjoy the most, mixed climbing, you know? Having all the choices to make, whether to use a rock hold or the ice and use a tool or a hand hold. That, to me, is the best of all worlds.
This mentality changed alpinism the most in the last 20 years.
People over the world are doing that.
You go to the rock gym, and they're ice climbing in a rock gym.
Introduced more people to the sport and meant that the technical ability and the technical level of climbers in general got a little bit higher, which meant that what they were capable of doing in the mountains got a little bit higher.
It was because of the games we play on cliffs such as these that people like Jeff Lowe are able to push the levels of alpine climbs. Jeff Lowe is definitely a part of all these routes. They're everywhere. Truly mixed climbs in that there's rock and ice. So it allows for these gymnastic, dynamic movements.
In climbing, there's this unifying theme that where you are today is a result of what your previous generation was able to do. And we pass it from one generation to the next.
If I can't do it, I want somebody else to be doing it so I can at least, vicariously see where things are headed.
People have always said, oh, can't go any further. This is insane. Well, people keep pushing the limits. They're pushing them now. Who knows where it'll go? I certainly don't know.
It's way beyond what I ever thought it would be.
This is it. Here we go.
He really has taken his visions and changed the world of climbing for people.
And that's kind of what Jeff Lowe did. He went out there with this idea and came back with a new reality for people. Now here's me 40 years later, kind of faced with the same situation. Is this possible? So Jeff Lowe's efforts continue to ripple out.
If you really want it, you can go ahead and get it.
He was always looking for a new challenge. I think it's just important to have ideas, be creative, and have your own ideas, no matter what other people think.
That's what a visionary is.
Some of the things that make him such a pillar of the community were not about climbing at all.
Jeff, morning, Howard. How are you?
As he matured in climbing, he really tapped into this sense of community.
With his numerous films, videos, and books, Jeff helped launch climbing into the mainstream. He also brought competition climbing to the States with his groundbreaking events in Snowbird, Utah and Ouray, Colorado. Jeff's contributions to the climbing world were monumental, but when he turned his attention to business, there was no guarantee that his willingness to take bold chances would yield the same result.
After we were on Lay Talk, Jeff started a company that he named Lay Talk.
I think Jeff's draw into the business world was partly because he wanted his own business. And how do you balance being a responsible business owner and satisfying your need to get out?
All of us that knew him were aware that his business life was not going to be all-encompassing.
But somebody has to pay the bills.
Don't know when I'll be back again.
The business failed just because Jeff was not a good business person. I think he bit off more than he could chew.
In fact, we've lost $37,000 in the first 3 quarters.
It was disastrous, no other way to put it.
He started another venture right away.
In 1988, he sponsored the first international climbing competition, Snowbird.
It was spectacularly successful as an event, except it lost money, you know? And the next year, when he tried to repeat it, it lost more money.
He's a bit of a risk taker, a bit of a gambler.
The guy lost a lot of money for a lot of people, and people were not happy.
I wasn't making business, I was following visions, and there's an obvious and retro that I see there's a disconnect there.
That passion, that single-mindedness can sometimes make us less than efficient at the other aspects of life.
It's very hard to pay attention to everything you need to in your life when you're lost in the clouds, and being a visionary has that aspect to it.
When he's good, he's like the best person in the world. When he's not so good, he's just like the rest of us, sort of fucked up. Behind the myth and behind the vision and the wild climbs, he was a real person that had some real challenges and real flaws. And one of the challenges that Jeff had was his relationships with the women in his life.
In 1982, before the collapse of his business ventures, Jeff married his first wife.
And he and his first wife had Sonia.
He had lots of responsibilities that he didn't have as just a climber. But he'd go off and do these long, extended climbs on his own and so on, and that would put a stress on a relationship. It's kind of like a sailor going to the sea, you know, and coming back months later and saying, well, how's everything going, you know?
He started doing the sport climbing competitions, and Catherine Destival was one of the hot women's sport climbers of the time.
She and I were, rivals at the time.
Katerina's a rock star. She was just this beautiful French woman. Right away, there's chemistry between them.
And we didn't have to speak too much to understand each other. Same dreams. From him, I learned in mountains almost everything.
Good morning.
Good morning. We had the same idea of climbing. And the next year, he asked me if I would like to be part of an expedition in Antrango Tower in Pakistan.
Today, we take you on an exciting adventure with 2 intrepid climbers who set out to scale a mountain peak in Pakistan.
We climbed together, and we discovered each other, and yeah.
You ready for me to get in there, Catherine? Yeah. Okay, slide over just a bit.
Which turned into a love affair.
Good.
Jeff had a wife and a little girl, and yeah, I didn't think.
He'd be gone for months at a time. For me, it seemed like forever. I don't really know how long it was, because when you're a little kid, it seems like it's never coming back. Beautiful. He would send me balloons and flowers for my birthday, but he was still gone on a trip.
Came into this world full of desire.
His values seemed to be confused at the time.
I believe Jeff started believing in his own myth. And that myth got taken down by the reality of failed marriage, failed business, and confusion over who he really was and what he really stood for.
Been on the other side of your love.
It was a bad time for Jeff and a lot of Jeff's friends. You know, we saw him kind of self-destruct.
And then I heard about the climb on the Eiger, and I went, oh my God.
The other side of your love.
Jeff's world was crashing down around him, and that's when he goes off to Switzerland. He thinks, oh, it'll be a good idea to go climb this route on the Eiger that's probably harder than anyone's done in the Alps. And sure, that makes a lot of sense, Jeff.
Been on the other side of your love.
We just all thought that we might never see Jeff again. The unspoken assumption was that he was going to commit suicide.
The Alps, that's where whole alpinism started back in the day. And for sure, especially the Eiger North face, that's this iconic mountain which was the last not climbed face in the Alps, and it was done in 1938.
It's got more history, more death and drama, and you name it. There's probably no more famous alpine wall in the world.
It's 1,800 meters high. It's a big, huge face. It needs a lot of different skills to climb it. Metanoia was mystical climb. You know, nobody knew exactly where it goes, but everybody knew, yeah, Jeff Lowe spent so many days up there. It must be really, really hard. But it was kind of like a mystery.
Metanoia is a special climb for me. In a way, I was climbing not a line on the mountain, but an idea in my mind.
Feeling deep remorse for the mess I'd made, I needed the kind of purity that I could only find at the very edge of my ability. Time after time in my life, when things were going wrong, I found that doing a long, hard climb would set me straight.
The reason I was fascinated by the story was that he was going through all kinds of personal crises, and the fact that he had just turned 40.
His life was insane, and this was a way to get back to sanity.
To rebuild his confidence, not on mountains, but on life.
I would go alone in winter without bolts on the hardest, most direct, unclimbed route in a style that would honor the Eiger's pioneers.
When John Krakauer and I got to the Eiger, Jeff was miserable. He hadn't slept well for months, and he said, I really do miss my daughter. He had gotten involved with Catherine d'Estavel the year before. And even in front of John and me, she's sort of disguising it at first. You know, they would hold hands under the table. On top of all this, Jeff was getting faxes and phone calls from his creditors saying, where the hell is my money?
You owe me money. When are you going to pay?
It just felt like a soap opera. He was so broke that he'd actually had to sell off some of his climbing gear. He borrowed a lot of John's gear and borrowed other stuff from Catherine.
She was very concerned, trying to give support and give him advice.
He didn't climb since 2 months, and he went on Eiger, like that, plop. I'm going to climb this face, and that's all.
He finally started up on February 19th.
He was kind of rusty getting the bugs out. And we're all like concerned because he doesn't have his shit together. I mean, he didn't.
A lot of little things started going wrong.
He's got a belay device that he hadn't even taken out of the package.
The pick of one of his tools came loose, which is what forced him to decide to come back down. I mean, we were worried about him.
Despite John and David's concern, I was eager to return to the magnificent climbing, so I left all my gear on the wall.
During the interim after his first attempt, Jeff noticed a cute little girl, and he started crying. It reminded him so much of Sonia.
Spends one night in a hotel, gets up, and then he's launching for good.
As I started to climb, I felt I wasn't alone. I was climbing with all those who had perished on the face.
The climbing on Metanoia climbs more or less directly up the Eiger North face. The bottom third of the climb is mostly easier, lower angle terrain. Then it tackles a really steep buttress, about a third of the way up the wall.
The bottom quarter of the climb is easy, but then it takes a very hard line directly behind where Tony Kurtz died in 1936, after his infamous final words, "I can do no more." His courage to the very end always stuck with me. High on the face on my 5th day, I could see the spot where John Harlan's rope had broken in the winter of 1966.
And then the climbing gets serious. He's on a really steep, vertical overhanging rock. It had been a really snowy winter. So he's often climbing rock that's covered with snow, and he's having to sort of scrape away and hook on stuff that he can't even see.
We were deeply impressed by what difficult climbing he was doing.
He's using all the tricks in his book.
As Jeff got higher, everything got more serious.
The higher he got, the steeper it got, the harder it got, the worse the rock got as the weather's getting progressively worse.
One storm pounded him with something like a foot of new snow.
He was in a really exposed place where he was just getting thrashed and pummeled. Spindrift avalanches just constantly coming down. A waterfall of frozen snow.
He's getting colder, sleeping less, and he was soaking wet.
So he's hypothermic, and he's running out of food and fuel at this point.
I was depleted after a horrific section of unprotected climbing when I found a ledge where I could make shelter. Shivering in waves, I stared at a picture of my 2-year-old daughter by the light of my headlamp. She was so far away. And then my awareness detached. My soul took me to the farthest reaches of the universe. I heard a low, deep vibration, a sound I hadn't heard since Ahmed de Blanc. I didn't understand what I was hearing. The sound and frequencies of my own DNA amplified by the mountain. And then I knew. I'd finally met myself, vibrating at the center of my universe. And I fell asleep with Sonia settled gently on my heart.
He announced in the morning that he was going to go for the top.
He's 5,000 feet up the wall. Another storm is coming in. So we had one last day, and he's like, okay, I gotta start moving.
Leaving the hermit cave, I was weak. Pushing to move fast, my left pick popped and I pivoted away from the mountain toward the valley. There was a jagged bulge 20 feet below me, so I jumped from the wall into space. The rope went taut after 40 feet, and I slammed hard into the icy rock. The pain helped me refocus. I knew I couldn't pull another stunt like that.
Instead of making him more frantic, that calmed him down. And incredibly enough, he got to within 20 feet of the shoulder of the West Ridge.
And he's at the end of his rope.
He'd run it out to the full length, and he couldn't go any higher.
It's almost evening, and the storm is happening. But all his gear is 450, 500 feet below him. He can't go down and get his gear unless he can get an anchor, and there's no anchors. He's on the radio, and I say, Jeff, if you just drop the rope, do you think you can solo to the top? And we can get a helicopter and pluck you off.
This radical decision to abandon all his gear, unrope, and just go for it.
He unties, and he just solos to the top.
Time slowed. The mountain moved under me, and finally, I found my way off the greatest alpine wall I'd ever climbed.
The helicopter goes up, hovers around.
The winch man is going to drop a winch with a cable, and he's got to clip it into his harness.
Jeff misses it the first time, and then he lowers it again, and Jeff clips it, and he's out of there.
Even in the midst of this tremendous relief at having finished the climb and gotten off alive, he was bothered instantly by abandoning his gear.
He's all about style, and he sees that as a compromise.
And he also told us that very day that he had come up with the name Metanoia. It actually came to him while he was on the climb.
I experienced what I think was an opening up of my consciousness to a true reality deeper than one I had known before then.
I named the route Metanoia. It was the beginning of a change in perspective that would enlighten the rest of my life.
He was on that wall for a total of 13 days. This incredibly impressive accomplishment, one of the great things I've witnessed.
To this day, it's the hardest climb done by an American in the Alps.
It was amazing.
The real question is, did this climb succeed in doing what he hoped it would do? Did it make all the bad stuff go away?
The wreckage of Jeff's life is still lying there in ashes, smoking. That hasn't changed. Then it's like, now what?
Came home to the same problems that existed before I went up. But I had a different perspective. And in fact, things improved after that.
When Jeff returned from the Eiger, he began a fundamental transformation that would take him the rest of his life to understand. Jeff's first marriage ended in divorce, and his relationship with Catherine d'Estavel ended 2 years later, but his determination to rebuild himself had never been greater.
When Jeff came back from the Eiger, he definitely seemed different to me. His life took on a different meaning.
His focus had changed.
When the road gets dark,
He really tried to become a better person.
A deepened man.
you can no longer see.
He really did start to reach out to a lot of people,
Just let my love through a spark.
including his daughter, Sonia.
Have a little faith in me.
Jeff regrets a lot of things that happened, and he wants to make those things right for her.
Give these loving arms a try.
His motivation since then has been to be the best dad he can figure out how to be.
Have a little faith in me.
I realized that I could be there for her in ways that I hadn't been so far in their young life.
One thing I've always learned from my dad is to really take some risks in your life, and I love my dad a ton, and I don't think I'd be the person I am without his influence in my life.
You will see.
Throughout the 1990s, Jeff and his second wife, Terry, focused on giving back to their tribe, passing on his knowledge to the younger generation.
Pick configuration for waterfall ice climbing today is this reverse curve.
He published Ice World, created the Ouray Ice Festival, and produced a series of instructional climbing videos.
Hi, I'm Jeff Lowe.
He was detail-oriented and precise about all of that, and came out with incredible products.
Have a little faith in me.
Despite their strong business partnership, Jeff and Terry separated in 2000. Around the time his health started to decline.
ALS stands for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, but it's also more commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. In its simplest terms, ALS is a motor neuron disease, so that means the nerves that control the muscles in the body die. As this progresses, people become weaker and weaker over time. But eventually, what kills someone is respiratory failure, because the diaphragm becomes so weak they can no longer exhale. Even though they say life expectancy is 2 to 5 years from diagnosis, there are many people who live much longer. There's still a lot of life left to live.
Hey, we tried hard, you know?
You know, that's what counts.
We fought the good fight.
That's right.
No, that's what it's all about, you know?
And we're still here.
He's like, yeah, adaptable man, yeah, I can deal with this. That same optimistic, always moving upward.
And he looks at it as just one more climb. You know, it's the climb of his life.
He's so accepting of the world and the universe, and I think he can roll with it.
He just keeps pushing through. He's a tough guy.
He's still Jeff Lowe.
Dad had a motto which became the family motto, and that is still my motto today, which is, what is, which, see, one thing about this disease I have is it's got a long name, but I just call it the incredible shrinking brain syndrome. And it gives me a ready excuse for any time I screw up in any way from here on out. So thanks for laughing.
I don't think I would have the same grace and humor that Jeff has.
Years later, he found love again with longtime friend Connie Self, who would care for him through his most trying chapter.
I have loved Jeff for many, many years. Jeff calls me the last woman standing. It makes you look old faster than growing hairs where you've never had hairs.
Oh, I'm done.
You're not dying today. As long as you're not dying yet, you gotta look good.
They're an amazing pair. The respect and admiration that they have for each other is just shines through.
I'm grateful to be here at this time with him. I just feel really blessed to have whatever time I have with him.
I'm pretty lucky that he lived through all of his terrifying climbing experiences. He could have died so many years ago. Definitely glad that Valentina will get to meet her grandpa. He's been a great grandpa so far. Hopefully he'll have a lot of years still with her.
Instead of succumbing to depression or defeat, Jeff adapted. He focused on other projects in his life that would challenge him mentally and emotionally. In 2010, a decade into his illness, Jeff returned to the Swiss Alps, feeling drawn again to their restorative power. It was a journey both inward and outward, connecting his iconic past to the ironic challenges of his life today. His climbing had taken him all over the world, to its most beloved mountains. But the Eiger would forever be his spiritual touchstone. As soon as he saw the Eiger, his heart opened. He was uplifted. He was home. Jeff invited Colorado's Josh Wharton to join him in Switzerland, to climb the mountain he no longer could, and to help him close a circle in his life.
It's kind of like this deeply personal experience that you don't share with anyone. So to have other climber climb on it gives you an opportunity to relive that experience.
Flying around the North Face, Jeff again felt the ghosts of the mountain's past, as well as his own.
I'm digging it out here. Looks like it's into Jeff's old rope. It's a bit like alpine archaeology. The Eiger has reclaimed it. Oh boy. Jeff, you were a burly guy. And it's free. Think we'll have to haul it. I'm strong, but I'm not that strong.
burly, actually, to rescue that pack. It was a lot of work.
When Josh Wharton dumped the pack at my feet, it was like reuniting with my partner from all those years ago.
It's frozen solid.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible that it survived 20 years, huh?
Incredible. I never really expected to see that. I felt guilty for 20 years.
Yeah?
And yeah, you've just taken care of my guilt.
The wall's a little cleaner again, huh?
And now we get to see what he's made of. Okay, we're rolling. All right, so we see what's in this thing.
Let's take a look.
Okay. Oh, it's opening. This is like King Tut's tomb here. Pair of goggles falling apart. Boy, that's a soggy mess. Wonder how that stuff all got in there. It's a mess.
Oh, yeah. That's a mess.
Oh, should we drink that? I'm not sure we should. Well, that's, I'm not sure. Not sure what that is. That's a blow-up doll. My glasses. My little tent. The endless pack. And that is it. That's it. Yeah. Amazing. The idea of metanoia returns again and again in my life. The purpose of life is to see what you do when challenges come your way. And the value of the experience is in how you handle those challenges. When I came up against this physical disability, I was okay with that because I realized how lucky I've been to experience what I already had to experience. I'm still interested in what's coming.
I think most people would have given up quite a while ago, but that's just not in Jeff's way of thinking.
He defies the odds. That's what he's always done, and he's still doing it.
The level of bravery that goes into his day-to-day life has a lot to do with where he's been.
As climbers, we know how to survive in difficult situations.
It'll show you how to get your fill.
That's what life's about. You know, when you're confronted with something, you figure it out.
He's going to do what he can do with the skills that he has, and that's a real vision too.
You know I came here with the dust.
That's an amazing skill that Jeff developed as a climber that he uses now, every day.
The Eiger climb keeps unfolding to this day. Open up one layer of beauty after another into something more.
I'd make my way all the way back home. Sorry, shakers.
He has so much love inside of him.
We don't need to say goodbye to Jeff. A little bit of him lives in all of us.
And here they are, the motley crew.
not depressing for me at all when I'm with him.
Yes, he does. We don't see Jeff as anyone other than who he is.
I love the man. He's a great man.
I'll take him any day.
Doesn't get any better than this.
What we're seeing now is just Jeff at his most evolved state.
And I think he also has a very metaphysical perspective nowadays.
Preparing himself for the infinite.
He told me that this is the greatest adventure he's ever been on.
The last great adventure.
How I'd come here with the dust and shook off the sin.
The thing that inspires me most about Jeff is what he's doing right now with his life. Not his climbing.
The scars wouldn't show. How I'd come here with the dust and shook off the sin.
Dad had a motto which became the family motto, which is have fun, work hard, and get smart in that order. And that's what I'm still doing.
He calls it embracing reality. It's that whole thing of doing the best you can with what you've got from where you are right now.
When you embrace reality, it puts you in the perfect place. It puts you in the perfect place for making good decisions and to be able to move ahead. So that's what I do. Embrace reality.
In my face and wind in my back and the voice in my heart telling me I can't go back. But this mountain I'm climbing, it takes all I've got. But I came on my own choice with more battles yet to be fought. But I'm where I want to be. My reward is the world I see. and letting my mind go free, climbing where I want to be. 4 o'clock in the morning, the Black Canyon starts to wake. Eat a hurried breakfast, feel my body start to shake. Several pounds of climbing gear and deadly gullies to descend. The climbing's steep and strenuous till the day comes to an end. But I'm where I want to be. My reward is the world I see, and letting my mind go free, climbing where I want to be. Steep desert spire.